John Ronald Reuel Tolkien is a man who probably needs no introduction. He is considered by many to be the father of modern fantasy literature. Most know him by his most famous works, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, which have left a profound impact on the fantasy genre. Some of you might know him as a professor of English language and literature from his work around Old English, most famous of which is probably his translation of the Anglo-Saxon epic Beowulf. However, since you're watching this video, the part of Tolkien's work that you are probably most interested in is his Conlangs, among which the Elvish languages of Quenya and Sindarin are probably the most well known. But today's video isn't a biography of Tolkien's life, so without further ado, let's take a look at Elvish. As ever, let's start by talking about the phonology of Elvish. The table here shows the Elvish consonant phoneme inventory. The consonants are... Wait, hang on a second. That doesn't look right. Whatever. I bet y'all are tired of Conlang reviews starting off with the phonology section anyway. You know, reading out sounds is nice and all, but I get a feeling that in order for a proper understanding of this language to be made, we should start with a sentence, so that we could fully appreciate the elegance and euphony of the Elvish language. Recently, I gave our Discord members a short sentence in Elvish, and asked them to provide their best attempt at a rendition of it. This is what I got.
Alagaan un isiangi circelafun schale irtatatan suketona.
Vulkan nesero circelafun schale irtatatan
What can I say? An attempt was made, I suppose. Sorry guys, but you all got it wrong. Though, I did see that some of you caught on to what was happening this time, when we didn't provide any IPA, but the correct way to pronounce this sentence is obviously... Isn't that beautiful? Euphonic? Now, if you're all a bit confused about my pronunciation just now, that wasn't because I'm really bad at Sindarin or Quenya. No. This is Elvish. Except that the elves we're talking about here are not Tolkien's elves. No, they're Santa's elves. Or should I say, Santa's elves. Hey everybody, welcome to Nga. Anyway, I'm sure you've been all made well aware of the Chimney Man and his activities across the world since his unsealing, but not many take time to appreciate the magnitude of his operation and who the workers that make it possible are. That's why today we are going to spend the next notable duration of time discussing the language and culture of the elves. So why did I start this off with talking about some Tolkien guy? I don't know. Guess something about a cellar door came over me? Anyway, I'm gonna admit right off the bat that I am not a native speaker of the Elvish language. My training has only gone back to my brief study abroad at the North Pole around Christmas time. Something about this particular day though just made me think, you know what? It's April. It's time to show the haters that when it comes to Elvish, I'm no fool. That being said, as we get to some spoken segments and the audio quality suddenly spikes, just know that I'm trying my best to portray the elves' elusive culture and language in as brilliant a light as I'm able. Also, reminder, if you like this, stuff, remember to subscribe and join the Discord server, almost at 20,000. Now, I think you've waited long enough for your educational experience for the day. Now the phonology for real this time. let's take a step back and take a proper look at the phoneme inventory. Now, where did I put those consonants, huh? Ah, here we are. The consonant inventory is... See, elves have these very stiff tongues, and as a result are incapable of articulating consonants that would require the tongue to bend to any meaningful extent. This is why the alveolar sounds are all laminal, that is, articulated with the blade rather than the tip of the tongue touching the alveolar ridge. Another consequence of this is the palatal-velar series of sounds, which results from the fact that any attempt to make contact with either the palatal or velar region of the mouth results in the tongue touching nearly the entire roof of the mouth. Under the vowels, Elvish vowels can be categorized into 4 groups. There are tense and lax variants of these vowels. The lax variants are written with an acute. This isn't that strange though. No. The interesting part is that all Elvish vowels are ingressive. Now, do you know what other sounds are always ingressive? Clicks. Elvish actually has the voiceless palatovelar click, that being... Since it's ingressive, it is naturally considered a vowel as well. Lastly, any vowel can be subscripted with an ogonek, which signifies the velar quality. Now, the crucial part here is that only the vowels are ingressive. The consonants are, of course, all egressive. What this means is that speaking Elvish requires the speaker to constantly flip-flop back and forth between egressive and ingressive when articulating their consonants and vowels. Now, for an interlude before we go any deeper, I'm assuming that a lot of you are familiar with the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, but for anyone who isn't, it conjectures that the language we speak determines the way we think. This hypothesis is from the 1920s though, and most of modern linguistics considers it to be abject nonsense. So why am I talking about this here? Well, the relationship between the elves and Elvish is actually the exact opposite of this. That is, many aspects of the Elvish language are a direct consequence of the strict rules and hierarchy of Elvish society. Thus, in order to understand Elvish, we must understand the elves themselves. So, what are the elves really? Well, as we've established, these elves are Santa's elves, or rather, Santa's elves. Every year, on the 24th night of December, the Chimney Man travels the world to distribute gifts among the people. The most prominent of his gifts is coal. Have you ever wondered where all that coal comes from? That's right, coal is mined by the elves. In fact, this is the only thing that the elves do, an entire society dedicated to coal mining. It is thus perhaps not surprising that the elves emphasize work above all else. Elvish grammar has a system much akin to animacy in other languages, and it is vital to determining word order in Elvish. The highest animacy, and thus primacy in a clause, goes to that which is working the hardest. This is known as work order. There are 11 work orders in Elvish, numbered 1 to 11, with 1 being the highest and 11 being the lowest. The work orders are as follows. Number 1, the Chimney Man. In any circumstance in which the Chimney Man is referenced, he will always have the highest work order, for he is always working the hardest. Except for the day after Christmas, of course. Number 2, coal. Elves mine coal, eat coal, and breathe air laden with coal dust. It should come as no surprise that coal is considered the most important aspect of Elvish society, and thus it's placed just below the Chimney Man. 3, the Master Carbonator. At the very top of Elvish society stands the Council of Master Carbonators. This council consists of a dozen or so elves who are assigned to a work order of 3. The council is ruled over by a Grand Carbonator. It is the sole elf that is assigned a work order of 2, who is thus considered equally important to the elves as coal itself. The Grand Carbonator is effectively the right-hand elf of the Chimney Man and reports to him in person every Christmas Eve. 4. Collier. These are highly experienced elves that have been working in the coal industry for at least 100 years and are typically regional overseers. Only elves at the class of Collier or above enjoy the privilege of having their names capitalized in writing, and they are entitled to wear or cloaks. 5. The Head Miner. These are elves in charge of a tunnel or a coal mine. 6. Canary. Used both for the lowest class of elves, that is, the common coal miner, as well as the bird. 7. Human coal miners. This is used for human coal miners, which are regarded with more respect by the elves than any other humans. 8. Other human adults. This is used for any other human adult. 9. Animals, used for any animal. 10. Human children. This is used for human children that are not coal miners. While important to Elvish society as the beneficiaries of their toils, they are deemed the laziest of beings. And 11. Everything else. Generally, this is any inanimate object other than coal, as well as abstract concepts, etc., etc. So, this is work order. What does it do? Well, for starters, work order determines word order. That is, a noun with higher work order must precede all other nouns with lower work order within the same clause, including nested clauses. For instance, in the sentence, the elf crouches on the table, which in Elvish is the word for elf, or more specifically canary, which is and has a work order of 6, precedes the word for table, which has work order 11. In addition to the inherent work order that every noun has, there is also another way to assign work order to nouns. This is done via a series of work order markers. These markers have the effect of raising or lowering a noun's inherent work order by some amount. For example, take the word for cane, which has a work order of 11, forming has the effect of raising the work order to 5, since 11 minus 6 is 5. Thus, this phrase is suitable for referring to a cane that performs as much work as a head miner, or which belongs to a head miner. There are a few things to note here. Attempting to raise or lower the work order of a noun below the minimum of 11 or above the maximum 1 is ungrammatical. Note also the terminology. The lowest work order is 11 and the highest is 1. Thus, raising occurs from a larger number to a smaller number, and lowering occurs from a smaller number to a larger number. So work order 5 can be raised to 4 or lowered to 6. Lowering can have the effect of expressing disdain, denigrating something, or making something seem less important or fake. This is known as derogatory lowering. Conversely, raising is typically a form of praise. Another use of the word order markers is in combination with an adjective or number to refer to an object in the context that has that work order. For example, the word for minecart in Elvish has a work order of 6, so a set of 7 minecarts may be referred to as which is literally just the number 7 raised to work order 6. Nouns in Elvish are declined for whether or not they perform work. This is not the same as work order though. Rather, this marks their position as an agent or patient of any given clause. The verb itself is not inflected for voice or person. This information is contained exclusively in the noun phrase. There are 4 such markers. performs work, glossed with WRK for working, which is used to mark the agent of a verb that denotes action that is considered to perform work. The opposite of this is does not perform work, glossed with NWK for not working, which marks the agent of a verb that denotes a state or an action that is not considered to perform worthwhile, at least, work. As there are two agent markers, there are naturally also two theme markers. Has work performed on it, glossed WKD for being worked on, which marks the patient or theme of a verb whose agent assumes the working form, as well as is being manipulated in some fashion, glossed MAN for manipulative, which marks the patient or theme of a verb whose agent assumes the not working form. The system naturally gives rise to two verb classes: the working verbs, whose agent assumes the working form and theme assumes the being worked on form, as well as the lazy verbs, whose agent assumes the non-working form and whose theme the manipulated form. Finally, there is a pair of contractions that denote reflexive forms, one for working verbs and one for lazy verbs. In addition to the agent and theme markers, there is another noun marker, which denotes a possessive form. Compounds and derivations. Nouns can also be combined with another to form compounds. Just like in Santa, the modifier is placed second. For example, in the compound Stone Hall means hall and is stone. Compounds are always written as a single word. The most important compound noun in Elvish is without a doubt the chimney man, which is derived from meaning being and meaning chimney. There also are a number of derivational processes that may involve nouns. For instance, the affix can be attached to a verb or noun to form an agent describing an elf who performs an action associated with that verb or noun. From, which means to learn, we get teacher. And from coal mine, we get coal miner, or an elf, or canary. Additionally, a common way to turn a noun into a verb, or vice versa, that applies solely to disyllabic words is to swap the vowels, where you can see that coal miner becomes to mine coal, the verb. Tense. There are two systems around which all of Elvish grammar revolves. One is word order, which we just discussed. The other is tense. The Elvish tense system is based on the hibernation cycle of the chimney man. The chimney man wakes up and is awake on Christmas Eve. Starting around the 29th of December, the chimney man enters REM sleep. Around the 4th of May, he sinks into a non-REM sleep, entering non-REM phase 1. This continues on the 26th of August, where he reaches non-REM phase 2, before finally sinking all the way into non-REM phase 3 on the 10th of November. These 5 phases form the 5 so-called syntactic tenses of Elvish. They're each marked by a particle that precedes the verb. For instance, the REM tense lasts from the 29th of December to the 3rd of May. So, how exactly is this used to express time? At any point in time, the present tense in Elvish is whatever sleep phase the chimney man is in when the utterance is spoken. For instance, on the 2nd of February, the chimney man is in REM sleep, and thus the REM sleep tense is the present tense. Thus, in a sentence, the semantic tense is the present tense, and the syntactic tense is the REM sleep tense. Syntactic tense denotes grammatical forms used, whereas semantic tense denotes the actual meaning. We may also say that the REM sleep tense is the syntactic present tense in this context. The syntactic tense following the syntactic present tense, in this case non-REM phase 1 tense, denotes the future tense, and the tense after that forms a future in the future. Similarly, the syntactic tense preceding the syntactic present tense is the past tense, in this case, the awake tense, and the tense before that serves as the pluperfect. But wait, what is the syntactic tense two tenses before the REM sleep tense, if there's only the awake tense before it? Well, obviously, it wraps. Like so. So in this case, the syntactic pluperfect would be the non-REM phase 3 tense. What this means is that the meaning of any of the 5 syntactic tenses is completely dependent on the time of utterance. Thus, if you don't know when an utterance is spoken, you'll have no idea how to interpret any of the tenses. Recall our example sentence, the elf crouches on the table, from before. The syntactic tense of this sentence is the REM sleep tense. Thus, it only denotes a present tense if spoken between the 29th of December and the 3rd of May. If spoken on May 4th, the meaning of this changes to the elf crouched on the table, as the REM sleep tense is now the syntactic past tense. We would have to change the syntactic tense to a non-REM phase 1 tense to preserve the original meaning. Conversely, if this new sentence was spoken on May 3rd, it would instead mean the elf will crouch on the table, as the non-REM phase 1 tense would now be the syntactic future tense. In written language, the choice as to what syntactic tense is the present tense is strictly speaking arbitrary. But by convention, it is generally that of the date on which the author wrote or started writing the text. In Elvish literature, it is custom to start the text with the phrase, "This elf declares that," with the status-appropriate abridged personal pronoun used as the subject. The syntactic tense of this phrase denotes the present tense for the remainder of this text. So, if the text is written by a collier during the REM sleep phase, the introductory phrase would be This is effectively prefixed to the first sentence of the text proper, thereby forming a new matrix clause around it. As a result, the rest of the first sentence is rendered in reported speech. As an aside, when it comes to stories, poems, etc., only the written form of these texts have a fixed syntactic tense. When a story is told by an elf, it will naturally, and indeed subconsciously without requiring active consideration or effort, rephrase the text by adjusting the syntactic tense relative to the time at which the story is told, while preserving the text's semantic tense. This is further complicated during reported speech, wherein the syntactic tense is relative to the time of paraphrase rather than the time of utterance. For example, in a sentence spoken during the non-REM phase 1, the REM sleep tense is the syntactic past tense. If reported speech is used to describe or paraphrase that sentence during the non-REM phase 2, the speaker would use the non-REM phase 1 tense, since that is now the syntactic past tense. Finally, if you paid close attention when I showed you the list of tenses earlier, you might have noticed that there's a gap between the awake tense and the REM sleep tense that leaves a few days unaccounted for. As nobody truly knows when exactly the chimney man falls asleep, the few days following Christmas are an enigma to Elvish speakers. They cannot, and out of respect and fear for the chimney man, will not express anything related to time during this time, which occurs often from the 25th of December to the 28th. During this time, all tense marking is dropped, and most elves cease writing entirely, with the upper classes preferring to communicate in Santa instead. This is known as the temporal void. Adjectives. Now that we know how tense works, we can talk about adjectives. Wait. How are those related, you may be asking? You'll see. Adjectives on their own are fairly simple. There's no agreement in the normal sense, and they simply precede the noun they qualify. What makes adjectives complicated in Elvish, though, is not the adjectives themselves, but rather a construct known as the standalone adjective phrase, or SAP, or SAP. A very common idiom in Elvish is to refer to a noun or noun phrase in the domain of discourse by an adjective that describes it. These are SAPs, and they largely replace pronouns in Elvish. as while Elvish does have pronouns, those are only used to refer to elves, but more on that later. SAPs consist of an adjective preceded by a so-called invoice particle. Syntactically, SAPs are treated as though they were nouns. In particular, they may be preceded by the usual noun particles and even other adjectives. In writing, it is common for the first mention of a noun phrase to be accompanied by one or more adjectives that they may later on be used to refer to it. For example, a fat elf with the name might be introduced as or the fat, and then later on referred to as or the fat one, where is one of the possible invoice particles. So, what is this invoice particle? The invoice operates in a similar way to adjective-noun agreement, except that it really is noun-clause agreement. That is, each noun is assigned a syntactic tense based on its initial phoneme, and the appropriate invoice particle depends on the noun's inherent tense as well as the syntactic tense of the clause. All syntactic tenses are assigned an integer value between 1 and 5 in most documentation, as you can see here. There are 5 invoice particles, which are assigned an integer value between -2 and 2. Intuitively, the invoice particle adjusts the tense of the noun to match the syntactic tense of the clause. That is, the appropriate invoice particle for a noun is selected as follows, where D is defined as the difference of TC and TN, where TC is the syntactic tense of the clause and TN is the tense of the noun. The value V of the appropriate invoice particle is then given by this formula, that being D if its absolute value is less than 3, and the opposite sign of D times 5 minus the absolute value of D otherwise. For instance, recall our example of the fat elf above. The noun is one of the awake tense, since it starts with this phoneme. In a sentence, in the REM sleep tense, the formula above gives 1, and thus the appropriate invoice particle is the one with a value of 1, that being resulting in this SAP. By contrast, in a sentence in the non-REM phase 2 tense, the formula ultimately yields -2, and thus the appropriate SAP is. In addition to replacing pronouns, SAPs are also used to ensure a clause or phrase observes proper work order. This phenomenon is known as extraposition. For instance, suppose we want to say 3 ferrules for the master carbonators under the mine. If you don't know what a ferrule is, it's like this metal band here on a pickaxe that connects the wood part to the metal part. Anyway, obviously the master carbonators have the highest work order, so they must be placed first. A naive translation would just be which literally means for the master carbonators under the mine, 3 ferrules. However, this phrase is ill-formed because mine, a noun with work order 6, precedes ferrule, a noun with work order 4. To correct this, we need to move mine to the end of the clause, but we can't simply move the entire closing prepositional phrase, as that would change the meaning of the phrase. We'd get which means 3 ferrules under the mine for the master carbonators. It's now the ferrules that are under the mine and not the master carbonators, right? Instead, the proper solution is to replace the problematic noun in the PP with a SAP. The noun is then left stranded as far back in the clause as possible, but of course preceding any nouns with lower work order. In this case, there is no adjective qualifying the noun, so the adjective is used instead. This adjective normally means proper, but in this context it has no meaning. It only serves as an expletive. In other words, to provide something the invoice particle can be attached to. Thus, a grammatical rendition that preserves the meaning of what we want to communicate would be demonstrative pronouns. As with many other things, deixis in Elvish is relative. Unlike other languages which employ spatial metaphors to express time, Elvish employs temporal expressions to express relations in space. That is, there are 5 demonstrative pronouns, each corresponding to a syntactic tense. The proximal demonstrative pronoun matches the syntactic tense of the clause. The medial demonstrative pronoun is expressed by the tense following the proximal one, and the distal demonstrative pronoun by the tense following the medial one. The pronouns are formed by combining the preposition with one of the tense markers, as seen here. For example, if a slide is in the REM sleep tense, the demonstrative pronouns are these. By contrast, if a clause is in the non-REM phase 2 tense, we instead have these. As you can see, they wrap around once we get to the non-REM phase 3 tense. What this means is that what to inexperienced speakers of Elvish might look like the same pronoun might have a completely different meaning or even be outright ungrammatical depending on the tense of the enclosing sentence. In reported speech, the direction is reversed. So instead of medial being the tense after proximal and distal being the tense after medial, instead medial is the syntactic tense preceding proximal and distal is the tense preceding medial. For example, consider a sentence uttered during REM sleep phase, in which the non-REM phase 1 tense is the syntactic future tense. In such a sentence, the medial demonstrative pronoun would be this, which is the non-REM phase 2 form. If this sentence is then paraphrased during the non-REM phase 3, the syntactic future tense would naturally be the awake tense, and the medial pronoun would be the tense before that. Recall that the direction is reversed in reported speech. Thus, the correct form would be the non-REM phase 3 form. Personal pronouns. There are 3 sets of constructions in Elvish that are jointly referred to as personal pronouns. While semantically equivalent, their usage is highly dependent on social status, and they are not interchangeable. The so-called full personal pronouns are formed by combining the demonstrative pronouns with the status-appropriate word for elf. The proximal demonstrative is used to express the first person, the medial to express the second person, and the distal to express the third person. This also means that the exact forms of the personal pronouns depend on the syntactic tense of the containing clause, as well as on whether direct or reported speech is used. For example, in a sentence in non-REM phase 2 tense spoken by a master carbonator, the closest Elvish equivalent to a word for I would be and literally meaning like this master carbonator. Similarly, in a sentence paraphrased in non-REM phase 3 tense, the word it in reference to a collier would be literally being that, or the distal that collier. In addition to the full pronouns, there are 2 forms of abridged pronouns. The high-class abridged pronouns are formed by combining the demonstratives of the noun cloak. The low-class abridged pronouns are identical to the bare demonstratives. There are a few rules that constrain the use of personal pronouns in Elvish. The full pronouns are used when speaking to someone of higher status, and the abridged pronouns when speaking to someone of equal or lower status. The high-class pronouns are used only by and in reference to the elves at the class of collier or master carbonator. The chimney man and the Grand Carbonator are never referred to with pronouns. Do not. I'm telling you, do not do that. I learned the hard way when I was up there. Finally, pronouns are only used to refer to elves. Saps are used for other beings, objects and concepts, etc. Saps may also be used whenever an abridged pronoun would be appropriate. Evidentiality. Now that we've discussed everything that depends on tense, we can talk about the rest of the grammar. Most of these will be fairly short sections, starting with evidentiality. In Elvish, it is split into 5 categories. The veridical, glossed ver, with the meaning as though decreed by the chimney man, or truth. There is glossed obs for observable, with the meaning either directly observable or deduced via reasoning. There is glossed com for communicated, with the meaning communicated by someone, or hearsay. And there is glossed nor for North Pole, with the meaning purported to exist in the North Pole. And finally, glossed as dub for dubious, with the meaning purported to exist elsewhere. The default evidentiality marker is generally it is commonly used for statements which the speaker considers to be true, but which are not self-evident or proven facts. Statements of fact instead just use the chimney man evidentiality. For example, 2 + 2 = 4, and so do elf statements that an elf is absolutely sure about. The meaning of this evidentiality is closer to as true as though the chimney man himself had decreed it. And a suitable translation may be most surely, or something like that. At the same time, it is of course also used to refer to literal statements made by the chimney man, if you are so lucky. Aspect. Aspect marking differs between working verbs and lazy verbs. Working verbs are marked for telicity, such as whether the work is done or not. Lazy verbs are marked for whether the laziness is continued or returning. For working verbs, telic is the default. For lazy verbs, continuous is the default. Aspect markers, if present, directly precede the verb. Elision. When multiple verbs in a row have verb markers in common, those markers are often dropped for any verb after the first. In particular, this often applies to evidentiality markers. If the evidentiality marker of several clauses is the same, all but the first are generally dropped. Copula. The Elvish copula is the empty root. That is, to express the copula, all verb markers, tense, evidentiality, etc., are used as they normally would be, except that the verb itself is, missing. If elision is applied, this can lead to a 0 copula. Numbers. Elvish numbers are direct calques of Santah's numbers. If you want to know more about this, go watch the Santah video from a few years ago. But for example, the word for 7 in Elvish is derived from and, meaning to build and more, respectively. It literally translates as to build more, which, of course, is a calque of Santah's. Oh God, I can't read those accent marks. Wait, where is it? Appearance and culture. Now that we've discussed the Elvish grammar at length, let's talk a little bit more about the elves themselves. Let me paint you a picture here. The body and mental state of an elf are optimized for the mining of coal, with all unnecessary aspects of life removed. The complexion of an elf is a grayish kind of color, can range from a pale sickly gray to a dark gray, depending on how much coal they're covered with. As the elvish eye is designed to thrive in dry and dusty environments, elves never need to close their eyes, and thus lack eyelids entirely. The only protection around their eyes is formed by multiple layers of eyelashes, which keep the coal dust out of their vision. Their throats and mouths of elves are likewise covered in dust, making Elvish articulation extremely hoarse and grating, as you may have noticed. Their tongues are stiff and don't bend. Elves also have no lips, making their sharp and blunt teeth, which are perpetually stained, often totally black by the consumption of coal, clearly visible. It is for this reason that Elvish lacks labial sounds and rounded vowels. Elves have inverted knees, which improves crawling in tunnel conditions. Their ears are pointy, but they point downward to avoid colliding with the low ceiling of their minds. To that end, lower class elves are also almost always hunched down and on all fours, so as to fit in even lower tunnels. Elves are mostly bald. The most hair they have on their bodies is their eyelashes. Lastly, the elves have no gender and are all referred to as it. They do not, and for that matter, cannot reproduce, and instead are all created by the Chimney Man. The social classes of Collier and Master Carbonator comprise the upper classes of Elvish society. These elves are easily identified as they are entitled to wear or cloaks. These cloaks come in three forms. The Colliers wear crimson cloaks that are thus commonly referred to as or red cloaks. Master Carbonators wear crimson cloaks embroidered with black patterns of coal, and thus are commonly referred to as this little fellow I'm drawing right now is one of them. Finally, the Grand Carbonator's cloak is entirely black and coated with coal. For this reason, the Grand Carbonator is commonly referred to as or the coal cloak. Other elves do not wear any clothes at all. The common elf instead keeps itself warm in the freezing temperatures of the Arctic by burning the coal it consumes inside its ventral furnace. Some lower class elves may attempt to pretend to have a higher social class than they actually do. Such elves are referred to as fake cloaks. Wearing a cloak that corresponds to a higher class than one's own is generally punished by decommissioning. That takes us to retirement, or retirement. A central concept in Elvish society is or retirement. Elves never stop working. That is, an elf only retires at the moment of its death. In some cases, elves who have acted out of line or otherwise disrupted the coal mining process, or worse, slighted the Chimney Man, can be decommissioned, which entails actively retiring an elf. This is also known as dishonorable retirement. Elves that retire honorably are given a or coal burial, that being that they are cremated in such a way as to turn them into coal, thus contributing to Elvish society even after their demise. Refurbishment. Refurbishment is the act of promoting an elf from a lower social class into a higher social class. This is a rare occurrence and only awarded to elves for distinguished acts of service in the mines. For instance, a canary that consistently delivers twice the amount of coal compared to its co-workers may be promoted to a head miner after some time, once new tunnels are constructed. Upon becoming a collier or master carbonator, an elf is rewarded with a cloak, which is subsequently sewn onto it, thus completing the refurbishment process and clearly demarcating them as now part of the higher social class than its former peers. Below the class of collier, candidates for refurbishment are selected by colliers. Candidates for the class of collier are selected by the master carbonators, and candidates for the latter class directly by the grand carbonator. An elf cannot become the grand carbonator. If the grand carbonator retires, a new one is constructed by the Chimney Man. Lastly, refurbishment has no corresponding opposite process. If an elf does something that causes it to fall below its social class, only decommissioning awaits it. Translation. The following is an Elvish rendition of J.R.R. Tolkien's Ring verse, as translated and adapted by the Elvish poet. Elves, of course, don't wear rings, so the verse refers to ferrules instead. Other parts of the poem that would have likewise been unfamiliar to the common canary have been replaced with more Elvish-like concepts as well. Without further ado, do it. Before we go, let's take a closer look at one of the sentences of the translation, as it serves as a good example of some of the quirks of Elvish grammar. The sentence in question is...
I'm not reading this one out again. You can look with your eyes.
Literally, that there are 9 for mortal men doomed to retire. The marker marks that the entire clause is an object of the verb to declare in the first clause of the poem. It can be translated as the English subordinator that in this context. The evidentiality marker qualifies the copula, which has no root. It is required here to prevent from affecting only the following noun phrase, as it must precede a verb marker to affect the entire clause. Is simply the word for the number 9, whose default work order is 11, raised by 7 work orders to give it a work order of 4 to match with feral in the preceding clause, which is elided here. Thus, this phrase literally means 9 of the thing with work order 4. The complement of the PP headed by 4 is the rest of the clause. The relative clause,
This whole blue area here, I'm not reading it out again.
which are destined to retire, is fairly complicated on its own. Relative clauses in Elvish precede the noun they modify, which in this case is mortal humans. Notably, the relative pronoun is not the first word in the clause. Rather, because it is the subject of a clause with a lazy verb, it is preceded by the lazy agent marker. The complement of to be destined is yet another clause. The immortal ones retire. This inner clause is preceded by the lazy theme marker, which marks that the clause is the theme of the sequence. Is actually short for that is, we have a SAP, the mortal ones, which agrees with human, followed by the noun mortal humans, which is also the referent of the sap. In such situations, that is, when a sap is followed immediately by its referent, it is not uncommon for the same adjective to appear twice in a row, since it is both part of the sap and it also modifies the noun. This is rather awkward though, so Elvish instead contracts the two into a single instance of the adjective. This phenomenon is known as sap contraction. This is fairly easily identified as the sequence invoice marker adjective noun isn't otherwise valid in Elvish. So in sum, the sentence is a dependent clause that acts as the theme of a preceding clause and which contains a relative clause whose theme is yet another clause, and both inner clauses either modify or reference a noun that occurs later on in the sentence. So beautiful, beautiful language, isn't it? Well, that's pretty much it. As usual, I would like to thank the matrons and YouTube members who helped me pay for the website and Minecraft server and the other various expenses that go into the making of this channel and community. Thanks to the new patrons that we've gotten in the past couple months since the circus, those being Anthony, Nash, and Liam. Thank you both. You're both officially granted access to heaven after you die, so you don't have to worry about that anymore. You are now amongst the club of people who get access to the Craft Minecraft server. You can provide memes for this green screen, have access to the secret Discord chat, get to see comic pages and other sneak peeks of content early. You can be judges in the Cursed Conlang circus if you want, ask me for any conlanging advice if you so desire, and whatever other benefits I may have time to give you in the future. This has been an extremely busy time in my life lately, and it's not going to get easier for several months, so be warned. Thank you for everyone who has stuck around while I get all this stuff in my life figured out, and happy April Fool's Day. So until next time, is out. Seriously, where'd these come from?